We drive on freeways so much that sometimes we forget we aren't alone. I'm not talking about the hundreds of cars that accompany us, but the spirits that wander on that exact same freeway we drive on every day. What's been left there, who's been killed there, and those who follow us home. Our doors are locked, but the presence of not being alone in the car creeps up on us. We look at our rear view mirror expecting to see an empty back seat. But what happens when we don't? They are there, good or bad, they are still there. It was a late night, and I was driving back home to Sacramento from Fresno. I had just visited my boyfriend, and saying bye had stalled more than I liked. I was finally on the road at about 1:30 in the morning and was already dreading the long drive by myself. I hated the long straight road on Highway 99. At least there's no traffic, I thought to myself. So I drove alone and went on my way. The gas was still halfway, and I told myself I'd stop for gas when I got to Merced or Turlock, and I did just that. At the gas station in Merced, I overheard the cashier telling the couple in front of me about a rest stop a few miles ahead. I would have stopped there if I were you guys. Just use the bathroom here or wait until you've passed it to use the bathroom. I don't know exactly, but there are way too many stories at that rest area. I wouldn't risk it. The cashier said something along the lines of that, and it made me curious. I had heard about that rest area, but I've never stopped there. A lot of my Hmong friends told me that it was haunted. I never asked how or by what, and I was never too curious to stop there and test it out myself. On my way back, I was feeling drowsier than I had thought. It was cold, but I didn't want to turn on the heat because I'd fall asleep if I got too comfortable. All of a sudden, I felt the need to use the bathroom. My bladder felt like it was about to explode any minute, and there were no gas station stops nearby. I saw the sign for the rest area and told myself I'd wait, or pee in my car if I had to, and that there was no way in hell that I was stopping there. But, as if something took over me, I told myself that it was just all make-believe and that I had nothing to be afraid of. I'll just use the bathroom really fast and leave. So I exited. There were a bunch of trucks there as well, so it made me feel more relaxed. It didn't seem like it was such a bad area after all. I parked and ran into the bathroom. Luckily, there was a mother and her young toddler with her inside the bathroom. I ignored them and ran inside the stall. I took care of business, got out, washed my hands, and left. It was getting cold. I was starting to shiver, but at least I was awake. I was alone on the road. There was only one other car behind me, and it was about 5 cars length away. The lights made me feel safe that I wasn't completely by myself. I checked the rearview mirror every now and then and just to make sure that the car was still there. But this time, when I looked up to check again, the light was gone. The car wasn't there. There were no exits yet, and there was no way that that car could have got off the road. I immediately looked ahead and focused on the road. I was getting a little scared, but it wasn't anything. Or so I thought. As scared as I was getting, there was this temptation of looking at my rearview mirror or turning around to see if there's anything behind me that I could not fight. So I looked back. When I looked back, I saw a blonde woman holding onto her toddler son. They were dirty, clothes ripped, and the boy was crying. I turned back to the front, panting. I looked at my rearview mirror, and yet nothing. I continued driving, but I could still hear the soft crying of the little boy behind me. Chills were running up my spine. The sound of his crying rang in my ears, and I looked at my mirror again, and there, I saw the woman's eyes piercing right through me. Her eyes were bloodshot red, and her face was moldy and old. Her lips were chapped and broken. Her eyes didn't look away from me as she was leaning closer to the front seat. I screamed and pressed on the gas, closing my eyes. When I opened them again and looked back, they were gone. I was still alone on the road. The remaining of the drive was fast and quiet, but I never felt quite alone, although very few cars joined me every now and then. I was finally in Sacramento again and exiting the freeway. I stopped at the red light. At the corner of my eyes, I saw a figure walking. I turned to look, and there they were. The same mother and her son walking on the ridge that I was stopped at. The boy turned over and looked at me. His wet eyes glared at me. His face was pale and his eye sockets were deep in red. My eyes were stuck on them as they were heading in the same direction as me. I ran the red light and sped home. The next morning, I told my mom about it and she called my uncle, who knew how to shayye. He said that they had been with me ever since I left Fresno. The reason I saw them at the rest stop, in my car, and at the red light was because they needed a ride. The little boy needed to use the bathroom, and that was the cause of the unexpected full bladder. He was crying because he was afraid, as they were more afraid of us than we are of them. The mother saw me looking and felt the need to defend herself and her son, which was why she was leaning towards me. When I saw them at the light, it was them leaving, one step closer to their destination. Then, my uncle asked me if I saw the car that disappeared, and I said yes, and asked how he knew. He then told me that we are never alone on the road. Some cars we see are there, but they aren't. There are some spirits that are unable to leave the road because of all the unexpected deaths that always occur. Now, I hate driving alone. I hate driving at night. I hate rear view mirrors. Do you ever get the feeling? The feeling of something or someone watching you from behind? The sense of someone so close to you that you could almost feel them? You can sense their presence, but you just tell yourself it's all in your head. Or is it? This story took place in St. Nazianz, Wisconsin, and the surrounding areas. One day, me, Jenny, Joe, and John were telling ghost stories in a car at Silver Creek. We started talking about all the different people who experienced paranormal activity while on the grounds of an abandoned church in St. Nazianz. The first story was that of my mother. Many Hmong people like to go to St. Nazianz to pick mushrooms behind the church. There's a patch of woods in the back. As they arrived, they split up and told each other that they would meet each other back at a certain spot. That was when they didn't have cell phones at the time. My mom went off and did her own thing, and when it was about the time to meet up again, she grabbed her bucket and started heading back to the meeting area. But no matter which trail she walked on, she always ended back where she started. She knew she was lost. She told me that she kept walking around in circles for a long time, and it seemed that even if she walked a different direction, she kept ending up where she started. She started to cry and call her friends names, but no one answered. So since that didn't work, she started to pick mushrooms out of her bucket and made a trail behind her while walking. She was yelling out loud and said that if there was anyone blocking her, they needed to stop because it's getting late and she needs to get home. And if they keep her from finding the meeting spot, she would come back and set a curse upon them. After saying this for a good 30 minutes or so, she used all of her mushrooms to set a trail. Finally, she reached the meeting spot. Everyone was already there waiting for her, and they had asked her what took her so long to come back, but she didn't dare say anything until they dropped her off home. As she got out of the car, she told them she would not be going back to that place anymore with them because a ghost was blocking her from leaving that land. My mother never did go back to pick mushrooms. There's more stories about that freaky place, but I'll make it short. After storytelling, Joe had the great idea of, "Oh, I've never been there, so let's go." I knew it was a bad idea because it was already 11 p.m. and, like my mom always says, be careful because you might bump into a ghost. We drove 30 minutes to our destination just to drive past it and make a U-turn around to go back into town. The story behind St. Nazianz is the church is called the JFK Preparatory High School, a Catholic school where the nuns used to hit the boys and torture them. It was said that One of the nuns hung herself out there, and it was rumored that you can hear the voices of little boys at night. There's a church by it and a graveyard where the nuns are buried. By January of 2004, it wasn't advised to go to the church or anywhere on the grounds. A gate surrounded the entrance, so no one was allowed on the property. Now, back to the story. As we were driving past the high school, everything is dark, but you could see the streetlights. Joe drove slowly, and then John starts to say, "Did you guys see that? There are lights on in the building." At that time, we all looked out the window to look at the building, but we saw nothing. It was pitch black. We told him to cut it out. Why is he trying to freak us all out for? We were in the middle of absolutely nowhere. As we drove past and busted a U-turn around, going past the building a second time, he started screaming and said, "Drive faster!" Joe pressed onto the gas and we were speeding past the building. We all turned to John and he's crying and covering his face with his hands. I told him to stop it, and why was he playing games? And then he uncovered his face from his hands and he's still bawling his eyes out. At this time, he's looking out the window, and then he says, "Where are we going? Why are we going to a cemetery?" At this point, I started crying too because I was scared. Joe is still continuing to speed to get to a road with more light, and Jenny is plugging her ears and closing her eyes. Everyone just got quiet, and Joe sees a gas station ahead with lights on. We stopped, and John tries to open the door, but the door wouldn't open. Joe gets out of the car and tries to open the car from the outside, while John and I were trying to open the door from the inside. The next thing I know is that John screamed and said, "Stop that, you ghost!" We all just stopped trying to open the door and watched John open the door so easily. He sprints into the gas station, and in about 3 minutes he runs back out and says, "Hurry, let's drive home." No one was talking at this time, but by the time we got home, we were all asking John what happened, and this is what he said. He said that there was a bunch of lights turned on at the high school, and as we drove past there, that's when a ghost saw us and they came into the car. The spirit was sitting next to him, and there were some spirits flying outside the windows as we were driving. He thought we were going to the cemetery because he saw their gravestones in the middle of the road. As soon as we got to the gas station and tried opening the door, there was a ghost holding the lock button down, so that's why we couldn't open the door. When he was in the gas station in the bathroom washing his face, the ghost was behind him. He told the ghost that he was going to come back and get him, but he needed to do something first. So the ghost left him at the bathroom, and that's when he ran back to the car and we all left. This happened just last year. My family's been living in this house for over 18 years, and over the 18 years, many strange things would happen. The people who currently reside in my house is my older brother, his wife, their 4-year-old daughter, my little sister, and my parents. I am a very light sleeper and would constantly wake up at around 3 a.m. I would wake up every night at exactly 3:33 a.m. for at least a month. Every time I woke up, I would hear weird things outside of my bedroom, like the chain lock outside of my door jingle, as if someone was touching it to get inside. Sometimes I would even hear footsteps. I would always just get up and turn on the lights and it would go away. Well, I wasn't the only one experiencing weird things. One night, my 4-year-old niece kept saying she saw an old lady outside of my door. We didn't know what to do, so we just didn't say anything. And then one day, my niece started carrying this toy around with her. It was a small stuffed dog, and it just came out of nowhere. She would be playing and talking to someone. We thought it was like an invisible friend, but my sister-in-law was super creeped out. My niece would say things like, "My friend eat too?" And my sister-in-law told us that during the night, my niece would stand up and just look at them. Like, stand there and stare at them. Well, one day, my sister-in-law decided to bring her shaman friend over, and she brought them upstairs to the bedroom. Her shaman friend told her that when my other brother and his wife came to visit, a spirit of a little girl followed them here to my house. And when they left, the little girl stayed because she liked my niece and wanted to play with her. She liked my niece so much that she gave her a toy, the stuffed animal. This really scared my sister-in-law because she never mentioned the toy to her shaman friend. Her shaman friend also mentioned that there were other ghosts in the house. One was an old man that has been there forever and refused to leave the house. She talked to the old man and he said that he was angry with the remodeling we were doing to the house. But he said that he wasn't the one that was bothering us at night. It was the other spirits. There was one spirit that was a boy and he just enjoyed watching TV. Well, to get rid of the little girl that was playing with my niece, my sister-in-law and her shaman friend brought my niece to the park. There, they burned joss paper by the tree and started walking home. While they were walking home, my niece asked, "Why isn't my friend coming?" And my sister-in-law didn't answer. She just said that they were all going home. Ever since then, my niece hasn't said anything weird, and I eventually stopped waking up at 3 a.m. every night. This story isn't that scary, but it's true. Over a decade ago, a neighbor, which were a family of 3, lived a few houses down from my parents. The father had started working late and eventually stopped coming home. The son, who usually came over every day to play with my younger siblings, stopped because of his mother. I knew of this because the son and I had spoken a few times about his family. We were used to seeing him and his mom outside of their gated front yard, playing, gardening, and waiting for the father to come home. Strangely, for a few months, no one saw them. We had figured the family left for a vacation since the dad's car was gone too. But the dad had left the family to be with his new lover and only came back after 3 months to pick up the rest of his belongings. When he came home, he found his wife and son dead. The mom had beaten the son to death and hung herself in front of the door. Random nights when I would come home from my late night out, or when I would walk my mom out to her car at around 3 to 5 a.m. for work, I would look over to their house and see the boy standing there, waiting. Other nights, I'd see both of them. Even to this day, I still look over. This event took place in Brown Deer by Milwaukee. A friend of mine told me that a Hmong elder had a house up for rent. It was a very beautiful home with 4 bedrooms and a deep backyard. Despite the fact that I would be the only one living there, I was so happy thinking that I found a really cheap house for rent. I'm getting a good deal for $500 a month, so I signed the lease and moved in a couple of days later. As I was getting settled in my new home, I noticed these papers hanging on the doors and windows. You know, those joss papers? I quickly took them off because I didn't believe in that. Sleeping there the first night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, and at the corner of my eye, I noticed something crawling down the stairs. I didn't care too much about it, but the next thing I knew, it was sitting next to me, watching TV. I was scared, but acted like I didn't care much, and after a while, it disappeared. I then had a dream that this lady tried to drag me out the window. I fought as hard as I could to not fall out. During nighttime, you could hear someone playing with balls upstairs, bouncing on floors and walls, and lights would flicker. A few nights went on, and I invited a couple of friends to come sleep over and have a few beers. I told my friends what happened the first night I slept here at the home. They didn't believe me, so I told one of my buddies to spend the night upstairs in one of the bedrooms, and he agreed too. Everyone left, and that buddy got wasted, so he went to sleep. I was sleeping downstairs. A few hours later, I saw him being dragged by the lady with long black hair from the top of the stairs all the way down. And right when he reached the bottom, he ran so quick out the door and left home. Ever since then, he never wanted to visit me ever again. I had a relative from Thailand come to visit me, and he asked me why I was still living here. He said that this house is not safe, and the papers that I took down at the beginning, they were there for a reason. If I lived here any longer, I would probably die because this woman's spirit is angry. I asked the landlord about it being haunted, and he said to me that it was, and that's why the previous people here moved out. I'm trying to rent it out until I sell it. I lived there for 3 months until I finally moved out. I only came home to sleep when I was drunk. This is a true event that happened to me in 2009 when I and my recent boyfriend were still dating. Names have been changed. My younger sister Sally was dating this guy in the town of Merced, California. My boyfriend Joe and my boyfriend Mike are friends. That's how I met my boyfriend Mike. Mike and Sally and I all live in Sacramento. One day, my sister wanted to go visit Joe in Merced, so Mike and I took her. We left at around 7 p.m. and got there at 8 p.m. Our plan was to visit and hang out and drive back home for the night. Eventually, they all got drunk and I did not want to drive home while everyone was knocked out, so we decided to sleep in Joe's room for the night, which is a garage that was turned into a big bedroom. Before explaining what happened, I have to describe the layout of Joe's house so you can get a visual of just exactly what happened. His room used to be a garage, so it was right next to the kitchen, and to get inside the kitchen, you would have to open his bedroom door that leads to a little square hallway. There are 2 doors in this hallway, a door that opens to the backyard and another door that opens up into the kitchen. The kitchen is in the shape of a square. To get to the living room, you would have to cross the kitchen coming from the door of the kitchen. Then, coming out of the kitchen and into the living room, you would have to make a right turn that would lead you into the long hallway past the living room. To the first right of the hallway is the bathroom, and further down to the right is the parents' room. To the left is the other 2 bedrooms that his siblings share. Anyways, this is how the story went. Everyone was drunk and fast asleep after a night of laughing and fun. In the middle of the night, I had to use the bathroom. It felt like I was going to explode if I didn't go, so half asleep and the need to be released on my mind, I opened the bedroom door and then opened the kitchen door and walked past the kitchen, the living room, and into the hallway, and then into the bathroom. By the time I was inside the bathroom and did my business with the bright lights in my eyes and am now fully awake, I realized I rushed to get to the bathroom and did not turn on any lights. Not a single light. It was a long walk back to his bedroom in the dark. For one moment, I panicked but brushed it off right away. Thinking that I'd do this 1,000 times during the daytime anyways, I took a deep breath and walked back as fast as I could through the hallway past the living room. As I made that left turn into the kitchen, I passed the fridge and at the corner of my eyes, I saw someone standing there next to the stove. They were burning a candle on the stove, so I turned to look to my side and there was an old Hmong lady standing there in the dark. Her black hair fell to her shoulders and it was wavy. She was wearing a black t-shirt with a Thailand long wrap dress, the ones old ladies wear in Thailand. She looked straight at me. Her eyes were emotionless and cold and a piercing black. I jumped and said to her, "Holy crap, you scared me." Those were my exact words. She did not say anything to me, assuming it was Joe's mom checking up on the family because the lady looked like her. I went back to the room and fell asleep. The next day, I had forgotten all about my encounter. I was in Joe's room with Sally and Joe's siblings. The siblings' ages range from 8 to 17 years old. All of a sudden, the old lady's face pops up into my head, so I asked the kids, "Hey, does your mom wake up at night to check up on you guys without turning on the lights?" The kids answered, "No. My mother always turns on the light when she walks around at night. She doesn't walk in the dark." "Does she leave her wavy hair down when she goes to sleep?" "No, she keeps it in a bun." I was getting spooked and scared at this time, so I asked, "Does your mother wear a black shirt and one of those Thailand dresses to sleep?" The kids reply, "No, Our mother doesn't like to wear those. She doesn't even own one. By this time, I had chills and was scared. I had just seen a ghost and thought it was their mother all along. Then, Joe's oldest sister said, "You saw our grandmother." And all the kids started saying the same thing. "Yes, it's her for sure. She has hair to her shoulder and is wavy, and she likes to wear those Thailand dresses all the time." Then, what they said sent chills up and down my spine for days, and it still does. Our grandmother passed away last year. About 3 years ago, my aunt suddenly passed away. So me, my wife, and our 3-year-old son went over to my cousin's house to help out with hosting family, friends, and guests at their house, not to mention the cooking. Before we went over to my cousin's house, we never mentioned to my son that his Nitai passed away or what purpose was going on over there. My son is the only child, so he's very independent and learns to play on his own. The first day, we were at my deceased aunt's house at around noon. My son comes and tells his mom that while she was washing the dishes, he wants to show her something in one of the bedrooms. He wanted to show her a ghost. I'm standing there listening to what my son is saying to my wife, and my wife tells him to come tell me about it. She's freaked out, but she was acting calm. My son runs over to me and says he wants me to go with him to the bedroom so he can show me a ghost. I was freaked out but remained calm, and I told him I wasn't going to the room with him. My son has always told us about spirits as soon as he was able to speak, so my wife and I knew that he could see them, but we were never too sure until this event. After I told my son I wasn't going with him to the room, we went outside to the backyard. There were several relatives standing around saying that there's no such thing as ghosts, and they laughed while my son was talking to me. A couple minutes later, my son comes back to the house, and he's got a big stick with him that he found. His grandmother, my mom, asked him why he was taking that big stick with him into the house. My son said, "I'm just going to hit the ghost." His grandmother yelled at him to throw the stick away, and he did, even though he wasn't too happy about it. Later that night, during the drive home, I brought up the subject and asked my son what he saw in one of the rooms earlier that day. And that's when my son said that he saw my aunt, the one that passed away. Ever since I was 8 years old, I've had this feeling of having encounters with the dead. When we lived in our old house, I used to have an imaginary friend that my parents said I always spoke to. Although I cannot remember her name, I do remember one instance. I had been sitting in my parents' room watching a movie, and I offered my imaginary friend to sit on the beanbag chair that I had brought into the room. I've always been told that I was a very OCD tidy child, and I remembered making sure that the beanbag chair was completely flat and smooth, as everything had to be back then. I remembered turning towards the movie after I had offered for her to sit down and hearing a sound. Looking at the beanbag chair, there was an indent as though someone was sitting down. My parents stated that I often spoke to people who weren't there and thought it to just be my imagination. We moved into our new house when I was 10, and although I feel safe in the home, I've always had this feeling of being watched. My friends often commented on how I speak to people who are not there. They too feel it is just my imagination. My mother has started finally to believe my stories because 2 years ago, my grandmother got very sick. She and I have always been close, and I spent many long summers with my grandmother, so when she got sick, it was very hard on me. She had been a strong smoker all of her life, and she always had this certain smell to her, different than a cigarette smoke. Anyways, my grandmother ended up not making it, and she passed away 2 days before my 17th birthday. I didn't even get a chance to say I love you one last time or to hear her voice say it back. My parents gave me a gold angel necklace the day of her wake, which was on my birthday. My grandfather didn't want her actual funeral to be on my birthday. My mother said that my grandmother was now an angel because she loved me more than anything, and that the necklace would always symbolize her love for me. I wore that necklace every day. Exactly 1 year after her death, I was speeding in my car, and I know I was stupid, and this was to meet my at the time boyfriend for our date, which I was late for. I was driving down a road that I've been on many times before, and I knew all the turns to slow down on. At one point, I had not been paying attention and I lost control of my car. I went into a ditch which was surrounded by trees. I was so far down that no one could see me. When I had lost control, I started to scream as my car started to spin around, and I just remembered stopping and feeling this warmth as though someone was holding me. When I had finally stopped, I was clinging to the angel necklace that I had gotten on the day of her wake. I do not remember ever reaching up to grab the necklace. When everything became silent, I heard a whisper of, "I love you," and I swear I could smell her distinct smell, one that I will never be able to forget. I looked around my car and started to cry. I couldn't get out of any of the doors because my car was smashed in at every point except for where I was sitting. The glass from both my front and back windshields were in a circle around me, as though I was in a bubble. My rearview mirror, which had broken off at impact, had hit my shoulder, and that was the only thing that hurt me, just a tiny little bruise. When the police came, they thought I was going to have to be airlifted out. They said it was a miracle that I was even walking. They said I should have been at least paralyzed from the waist down. When they saw the mirror, they had asked where it had hit me, fully believing that it had hit me in the head when I told them that it was just my shoulder. They didn't believe me. They said that it was as if something had deflected it from hitting my head, and it went at an angle impossible of going down on its own. I had climbed out of my window and taken a look at my car. It didn't even resemble a car. I've told my story to those who have asked, and I will always state with all my heart that my grandmother was the one that saved my life that day, and that she was the reason that I'm able to walk and breathe on my own. I just wanted to say, thank you, Grandma, for saving my life and for always being there for me.